Barlow's was the kind of restaurant where everything gleamed. Glasses sparkled under low-hanging lights, white tablecloths were pressed into sharp lines, and the air smelled like garlic, truffle oil, and money. Emily Monroe had worked here for 2 years, and by now, she moved through the space like she was part of the architecture, quiet, efficient, unnoticed and less needed. She liked it that way. Being invisible was a skill she had learned slowly. It was protection. If people didn't look too closely, they wouldn't ask questions. They wouldn't see the tired eyes behind the mascara, or the way her hands trembled just a little when she thought no one was watching. But someone was always watching. "Table 9 needs a refill," Riley said, slipping past her with a tray full of champagne flutes. Riley had been her lifeline when she first started here, sharp-eyed, louder than necessary, and always looking out for her. Emily nodded, grabbed the water pitcher, and drifted toward the table, her smile neutral, practiced. The couple at 9 didn't look up. No one ever did. She poured without a sound and moved on. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Jacques Carter. She had counted the calls, 47 in the last 10 days. The number had stopped feeling real around call 30 and had started feeling like evidence. Like proof that she wasn't paranoid. Like a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to everything she had tried to leave behind. "Are you okay?" Riley asked when they passed each other again by the hostess stand. "I'm fine, Emily Leet." "That's the 3rd time your phone's buzzed in the last hour." He found the restaurant number. Riley stopped short. He called here 6 times. Left messages with the hostess. "You need a restraining order." Emily shook her head, organizing menus that didn't need organizing. It's not that simple. It literally is that simple. He hasn't done anything. Not really. He's stalking you, Em. He's just present. Showing up. Watching. Riley's jaw tensed, but she didn't argue further. A customer approached, and she turned away. They'd have the conversation again. They always did. And every time, Emily would find new reasons not to escalate. Because escalation felt like lighting a match in a room soaked in gasoline. Jake had been her boyfriend for 2 years. In the beginning, it had felt like intensity. Like love that burned too hot to contain. Flowers at work. Surprise visits. Check-in texts. It took her almost a year to realize that the flowers came with accusations, the surprise visits were surveillance, and the check-ins were demands for location updates. By then, she had distanced herself from her friends, dropped her online design course study group, and stopped going anywhere that might invite conflict. The night she left, he had screamed for hours. Not hitting. Never that. But circling words like knives, cutting without touching. She moved out the next morning and never looked back. Except he followed. He never broke in. Never threatened her directly. Just watched. Called. Waited. And now he had found her safe place. Her last place. Barlow's. Emily exhaled, steadying herself as she walked past the bar, where a man sat in the 3rd stool from the left. Same stool he always chose. Ça me calme de Méanor. Same tailored suit that looked too good to be bought off the rack. Nico Moretti. He had been coming to Barlow's 3 nights a week for months. He always ordered the veal ossobuco, drank whiskey neat, tipped generously without being showy. And he always sat where he could see both the entrance and the dining room. He noticed everything. Emily had caught his gaze once weeks ago, during a slow Tuesday when her hands were shaking too hard to carry a tray. He hadn't said anything, just looked at her, really looked. Not like a man undressing her with his eyes, not like a man demanding attention. Like a man reading her. Cataloging. It unnerved her. Tonight, as she passed by, he looked up again. "Miss Monroe," he said, voice low, touched by something that might have been an Italian accent but wasn't thick enough to place. She blinked. "Can I get you anything else, Monsieur Moretti?" "The check, please." "Of course." She reached for the bill folder, fingers brushing against his credit card, black, heavy, the kind with no spending limit. "I'll have Riley bring this over." "No," he said. Not harsh. Just final. "You." She hesitated. Riley was standing 3 feet away and raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Emily processed the payment with fingers that suddenly felt like someone else's. As she slid the receipt across the bar, Nico's gaze lingered. "You study design," he said. Her breath caught. "Excuse me."
Graphic design.
"Online courses."
Parsons School of Design.
"How?" "You mentioned it 3 weeks ago."
To another server.
He was right. She'd been venting to Riley about a typography assignment. She hadn't known anyone else was listening. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he added. "Just noticed you work hard. Here
And elsewhere.
Then he was gone.
Just like that.
Quiet, deliberate, his bodyguards materializing out of the shadows as they followed him out the door. Emily stood frozen, receipt folder still in hand. "He noticed your work ethic," Riley said at her side, low and sharp. "Emily, that man doesn't notice anyone unless there's a reason. Maybe he's just observant." "Nobody's that observant on accident." Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. Because her phone buzzed again in her pocket. Jake. Always Jake. And suddenly the idea that someone else had been paying attention didn't feel quite so terrifying. It felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. That night, she changed in the staff bathroom, stepping out into the crisp fall air with her coat clutched tight around her. She took the long way home, 6 blocks through streets she knew too well, her heart pounding in her throat. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look back. But she felt it. The watching. Always the watching. And this time, she wasn't sure who it belonged to. The first time Emily realized Nico Moretti was still watching her, it was subtle, too subtle to call attention to without sounding paranoid. A sleek black SUV idled across the street from her apartment for 3 nights in a row. Same model. Same tinted windows. Then it disappeared, only to be replaced by a different car a week later, equally dark, equally unremarkable. She noticed the pattern because patterns were what she understood best. Jake had trained her to look for them, the pauses between his text messages, the tone of his voice before an argument, the small clues that told her what kind of night it was going to be. But this was different. This wasn't threat. It felt like presence.
Quiet, steady, deliberate.
She wanted to tell herself she was imagining it, but she couldn't quite believe that. Not after the way Nico had looked at her that night at Barlow's, like he was memorizing the angles of her life. When she arrived for her next shift, he was there again, same bar stool, same whiskey, same posture that suggested patience was his natural state. "Miss Monroe," he said as she passed. She hesitated.
Monsieur Moretti. You walk home every night.
"Yes. It's late."
It's Manhattan.
He tilted his head, studying her. "That's not an answer." "I can handle myself," she said, though the words felt hollow the moment they left her mouth. "Maybe. But you shouldn't have to." He said it simply, without pity. That was what made it dangerous, the way his voice wrapped around ordinary concern and made it sound like a promise. Riley caught her later behind the hostess stand. "Do you know who that is?" "I know he tips well," Emily said, trying to sound casual. "He's not just rich, Em. He's connected. Like, criminally connected."
Emily looked weakly.
"You've been watching too many mob movies." "I'm serious. People whisper about him. Businessman, yes, but not the kind with offices and HR departments. The kind who doesn't need to raise his voice to make people disappear." Emily wanted to dismiss it, but part of her had already guessed. The control, the composure, the way everyone in Barlow's seemed to defer to him without quite knowing why, it all fit. Still, there was something in Nico that didn't align with the caricature of danger Riley painted. Something colder, yes, but also strangely principled. 2 nights later, Jake walked into Barlow's. It happened fast, the kind of moment that stretches only in memory. Emily was refilling glasses at table 7 when she felt it, the shift in the air. The sound of his voice, a voice she knew too well, cut through the low jazz like a crack in glass. Jake said, smiling like they were still together. He was wearing the same gray suit she'd once told him made him look good.
You look beautiful.
Her hand trembled.
Jake, you can't be here.
I'm a paying customer.
You wanted dîner. Meb conversation.
Please leave. After everything we had, you can't even talk to me? His voice rose just enough to draw attention. Nearby tables fell silent. The weight of other people's curiosity pressed against her skin. I'll get the manager, she said, turning away. His hand shot out, wrapping around her wrist. Not enough to bruise.
Just enough to own. Don't walk away from me, em.
Sir, came the calm voice that silenced the room. Nico Moretti stood 3 tables away, glass in hand, eyes unreadable. You're disrupting my evening, he said. That concerns me. Jake turned, irritation flashing. This is none of your business. Nico didn't move. It became my business when you touched her. A ripple passed through the room, fear, recognition, something nameless. Let her go, Nico said softly. Jake hesitated, then dropped her wrist.
Dis si Saint-San.
We're having a conversation. The lady asked you to leave. Jake's jaw clenched. He looked between Nico, Emily, and the other diners pretending not to stare. Then he stepped back, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. Emily stood frozen, the shape of his fingers still burning on her skin. She could feel every heartbeat echoing through the place where he'd held her. Riley was suddenly beside her. You okay? She nodded, though she wasn't. Not even close. Nico set his glass down and signaled for the check. He didn't look at her again, but she felt the echo of his presence long after he left. That night, she dreamed of glass breaking. The next morning, the restaurant's manager, a man named Robert, called her into his office. He had already spoken to the police. They'll take a report if you want, he said, voice careful.
Emily shook her head.
He didn't hurt me. Yet. He won't come back. But he did. Not to the restaurant, but to her life, in the only ways he could.
Unknown number.
Texts from accounts with no profile pictures. Messages that swung between apologies and accusations. He showed up outside her apartment, standing across the street, always just far enough away that the police couldn't call it harassment. Riley told her again to go to the police. Emily told her again it wasn't that simple. She was right and wrong at the same time. By the end of the week, she stopped seeing the black SUV. Instead, there was a man she didn't recognize, a broad-shouldered figure who stood by the corner deli every night she walked home. He never spoke, never looked directly at her, but she knew he was there because she could feel the weight of his awareness.
Nico's awareness.
She told herself she should be angry. No one had asked her if she wanted protection. No one had given her a choice. But when Jake appeared again, this time outside her building in the rain, she didn't call the police. She called the number Nico had written on the back of his card. He answered on the second ring.
Miss Monroe.
He's outside. My ex. I don't know what to do. Stay inside. Lights on.
Don't open the door. Yell l'endelit.
The line went dead. 15 minutes later, 2 men in black coats appeared on the street below. They spoke to Jake quietly. Whatever they said made him back away, palms up, voice shaking. Then he left. Emily watched from her window, heart pounding. A message appeared on her phone minutes later.
Unknown number. You're safe now.
Sleep. She didn't. She sat awake until morning, watching the sky turn pale above the city, wondering what she had just invited into her life. The next evening, when she arrived at Barlow's, Nico was waiting by the bar. You shouldn't have to be afraid, he said simply. I didn't ask you to protect me. No, he agreed. You didn't. But that doesn't change the fact that you needed it. Why? She asked. Why me? He studied her for a long time. Because some men only understand consequences. And I make sure they learn them. She wanted to say something sharp, to tell him she didn't want to be anyone's responsibility. But the words stuck in her throat. Because part of her, the part still trembling from Jake's shadow, wanted to believe that maybe this time, someone was on her side. As she walked home that night, the streets felt different. Not safer, exactly, but steadier. There were eyes in the dark still, but not all eyes were threats. For the first time in months, she didn't check behind her every 10 steps.
Somewhere, she knew, Nico Moretti was watching.
And she couldn't decide if that was comforting or terrifying. He no longer existed on the periphery of her world. He was in it now, undeniably present. And despite everything she told herself about keeping a safe distance, she didn't ask him to leave. They never made plans. He simply began showing up at Barlow's on the nights she worked, always seated at the same bar stool, always with the same patient silence that made the air around him feel thicker. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he didn't. But his presence became a kind of rhythm in her life, expected, grounding, and somehow never demanding. One night, he stayed late, long after the dinner crowd had gone and the kitchen lights had dimmed. Emily was polishing silverware behind the bar when he spoke without looking at her.
You don't belong here. She glanced up.
Excuse me.
Waiting table.
You're meant for something else.
I pay my bill. I keep my head down. Det är what I belong to.
He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. That's what survival looks like. Not purpose.
She said nothing.
She didn't know how to answer someone who saw more in her than she allowed herself to believe. Later that week, an envelope arrived at her apartment, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a business card for an independent marketing firm and a note. They're looking for a freelance designer.
You débit perfect. Use your name.
There was no signature, but she didn't need one. Emily stared at the card for a long time. Part of her wanted to rip it up. Another part, the part that remembered late nights with coffee and Illustrator tutorials, wanted to frame it. She called the number.
2 weeks later, she landed her first client under the name Monroe Creative Studio.
The work was small, a logo and branding kit, but it paid more than a week's worth of shifts at Barlow's. More importantly, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in years.
Capable.
She never asked Nico how he knew the firm. He never brought it up again. Instead, they found a strange kind of equilibrium. He watched her grow, and she let him. They started talking more. About their pasts. About things they didn't say to other people. Emily learned that Nico had grown up in Brooklyn, raised by a single mother who had died young. He didn't talk about what came after, and she didn't press. She told him about Jake, in more detail than she'd told anyone. How the relationship had started like a fire and ended like smoke. How control didn't always look like screaming or bruises, it sometimes sounded like concern. Like love spoken through clenched teeth. Nico listened. He never interrupted. Never offered advice unless she asked. One night, as they walked together through Chelsea after her shift, Emily asked, "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Helping me."
Watching over me. You don't know me.
He looked at her like that wasn't true at all. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Someone I couldn't protect." She didn't ask who. The grief in his voice was enough. By the end of the month, she was only working 2 shifts a week at Barlow's. The rest of her time was filled with freelance projects, logos, website mock-ups, brand guidelines. Her world expanded beyond waiting tables and walking home in fear. And yet, fear still lived in the corners. Jake hadn't reappeared since the night Nico's men had sent him away. But Emily knew better than to believe in silence. Jake's absence was not surrender. It was planning. Her instincts were confirmed one afternoon when Riley buzzed her apartment with wide eyes and a white face. "He was at the restaurant," Riley said, breathless. "Jake." He didn't come in. Just stood across the street.
For almost an hour.
Emily's stomach turned cold. She didn't call Nico. Not immediately. Instead, she sat on her couch, knees pulled to her chest, the memory of his grip on her wrist rising like a bruise. She thought about police reports that went nowhere, restraining orders that changed nothing, and fear that didn't respect paperwork. Then she thought about Nico.
She dialed the number.
"I'll take care of it," he said. That night, the shadows around her building seemed heavier, but she felt no danger.
Just anticipation.
The next morning, there was a message on her phone.
Unknown number.
He won't be back. And he wasn't. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. No calls. No sightings. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt watched. Not by Jake. By Nico. The shift was subtle. He started asking more questions. About where she went. Who she met. How she spent her time. It wasn't intrusive. Not exactly. But it felt close. Too close. One evening, she arrived early at Barlow's and found Robert, the manager, arguing with a man near the kitchen. The man was unfamiliar, but Emily caught snippets of the conversation. "You're not on payroll." "She doesn't know I'm here," Nico asked. "That's not a reason." Emily turned the corner too fast, and the man went quiet. He glanced at her, then left. Later that night, when she brought Nico his drink, she asked, "You've had someone watching me?" His expression didn't change. "Yes." "Why?" "You said yourself Jake wasn't finished." "I didn't ask for bodyguards. I didn't ask for permission."
Emily set the drink down ardeden necessary.
"You can't make choices for me and call it protection," she said.
I can if it keeps you alive.
"No," she said firmly.
You don't get to decide what I need. You don't get to follow me, monitor me, place people in my life without telling me.
He studied her for a long moment. "You didn't want help. You wanted autonomy. I understand that. But your ex is dangerous." "And you're not?" she asked, voice quiet. "You think this is different because you wear better suits?" He didn't answer. She walked away before she said something she couldn't take back. 2 days later, she came across an unlocked file on an iPad behind the bar. Nico had left in a hurry for a call. She didn't mean to snoop. She really didn't. But her eyes caught a voice memo, labeled simply, "Carter, September." She pressed play. A familiar voice, Nico's, spoke low and even. "Track his phone. No contact unless she's in immediate danger. I want to see if she has the strength to leave him herself. If she doesn't, she's not worth the fallout." Emily's hands went cold. She listened again, just to be sure she'd heard right.
Not worth the fallout.
She left the restaurant without a word. Nico called that night. She didn't answer. Because now she wasn't sure who had been protecting her, and who had been studying her like a case file. Whatever they had built between them had cracks. And Emily Monroe wasn't sure if it could hold the weight of betrayal. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the narrow bed of her Brooklyn apartment, staring at the ceiling as the voice memo looped in her mind. See if she has the strength to leave him herself. If she doesn't, she's not worth the fallout. She replayed every moment with Nico since that first night at Barlow's, every glance, every silence, every offer of help, and suddenly all of it felt different. Like a puzzle whose image had just changed mid-assembly. It wasn't care. It was calculation. She had been tested. Measured. And she hadn't even known. By morning, Emily had packed a small overnight bag and left her apartment, switching off her phone and rerouting her emails. She took a sublet for a few nights in Long Island City, somewhere quiet, out of sight.
Somewhere Nico wouldn't look right away.
She didn't want revenge or confrontation. She wanted space. She needed to think without hearing his voice. She needed to breathe without wondering if someone was watching. 3 days passed. She didn't return Nico's messages. She didn't open the door when one of his drivers appeared at the front of the building. She didn't check if someone was tailing her when she went to the grocery store or took walks at night. She didn't need to. She already knew they were there. The knowledge was exhausting. She hated that a part of her still wanted to answer him. To yell, to demand answers, to ask if she had ever been real to him or just another problem to solve. But she didn't. She worked instead. She buried herself in new design commissions, finishing a full brand package for a Brooklyn florist and a website overhaul for a nonprofit in Queens. Her inbox filled with inquiries from clients she hadn't even pitched to. Nico's reach, she realized, hadn't just touched her safety. It had touched her success. On the 4th night, it rained. She stayed in, flipping through an old sketchbook, trying to reclaim the voice that had felt so strong a week ago. She was halfway through a new typography concept when a sharp knock rattled the door.
Très précise rap. No hésitation.
She froze. Then a voice followed, calm, measured. "Emily, it's me."
Nico.
She didn't answer. He waited. "I'm not here to explain," he said. "I'm here because something's happened." Still, she said nothing. "Jake Carter," he continued, "sold information about me to people he shouldn't have. He gave them access, schedules, locations, internal communications. He wanted me exposed." Silence stretched between them. "I didn't see it coming," he admitted. "And I usually do." Emily opened the door. Nico looked soaked, his charcoal coat dripping at the shoulders, hair slicked to one side. He wasn't his usual composed self. There was a bruise darkening along his jawline, half hidden by shadow. "You're hurt," she said quietly. He nodded once. "It wasn't meant for me, but it came close." "You were attacked?" "I was ambushed." Her stomach dropped.
Because of Jake?
"He thought if he couldn't get to you, he'd get to me." Nico's voice was steady. "He was angry I intervened. He didn't just want you back. He wanted to punish you for walking away." Emily stepped back, letting him inside. She didn't touch him. Didn't ask if he was okay. Not yet. He stood near the window, looking out at the hazy city lights. "I had people on Carter. Watching. Tracking. I gave the order not to act, because I wanted to see who you were. I thought if you walked away on your own, that meant something." He turned toward her. "I thought strength could be measured in silence." "It can't," she said. "I know that now." "No, you don't," she snapped. "Because if you did, you'd understand what it felt like. To know someone saw you drowning and decided to wait. To test if you were strong enough to swim alone." His eyes didn't flinch. "You didn't drown." "But I could have." The room fell quiet. Then she said softer, "You made me feel safe. But now I don't know if I ever really was. I protected you the best way I knew how." "No," she said, stepping closer.
You controlled the situation.
"You manipulated it to prove something. That's not protection. That's power dressed up as care." Nico looked at her with something that might have been regret, or maybe it was just exhaustion. "I came tonight because I needed you to know the truth. Not just about Jake, but about me." "I already know the truth," she said. "You're not the villain. But you're not the hero either." "I don't want to be either," he replied. "I want to be someone you can trust. Then stop treating me like I'm fragile. Or dangerous. Or yours to manage. I've never thought of you as fragile. Then stop making decisions for me."
Another silence.
Finally, Nico nodded. "You're right." She didn't expect that. "You deserved more honesty. You deserved choice." "I needed choice," she corrected. He stepped back toward the door. "I'll go," he said. "But one more thing." She waited. "I never doubted your worth."
Not for 1 second.
"I just didn't know how to show it without trying to control everything. That's the part you need to unlearn." "I'm trying," he said. Then he was gone. Emily, "You're right.
I'm not fragile.
But I'm also not afraid." The message went unanswered for an hour. Then came a reply. I don't need to be your shield. But if you ever ask, I'll still stand between you and the fire. She didn't respond. Not because she was angry, but because, for the first time, the fire didn't feel like it was winning. And she had no intention of burning quietly ever again. The weeks that followed moved slowly, but for the first time in years, Emily didn't feel like she was surviving her own life. Her days were filled with work, real work that meant something. She built brand identities for small businesses, crafted sleek logos, designed marketing materials, and consulted on digital aesthetics.
Monroe Creative Studio wasn't juste un idea anymore.
It was tangible, growing, and hers. She returned to her Brooklyn apartment, no longer looking over her shoulder every time she turned the key. She still checked the locks, but the fear that had once settled into her bones like cold had finally begun to thaw. Nico didn't contact her again after that night. Not for days. Not even a message to follow up on what they'd said. And while a part of her had expected silence, another part wondered if he'd simply faded into the shadows again, retreating to the distance from which he had first watched her. But then, after almost 2 weeks, she received a letter. Not a text, not an email, an envelope.
Tic paper, Andritaine.
It was short. I don't expect anything. But I meant what I said. I'm still here, in whatever way you allow. N. There were no promises. No apologies. Just presence, offered like an open hand. She folded the note and placed it in her desk drawer. 3 more days passed before she called. They met at a quiet cafe in Soho. Not at Barlow's, not at his penthouse, not anywhere that belonged to his world or hers.
Neutral Grund.
Nico arrived 5 minutes early. He always did. When he saw her, he stood, not out of formality, but habit. She noticed the bruise on his jaw was gone, replaced by a faint scar near the edge of his cheekbone. He looked tired, like someone who had been carrying weight without rest. Thank you for coming, he said. Emily nodded, sliding into the chair across from him. I didn't know if I should. You didn't owe me anything. That's true, she said softly. But I wanted to come. Because even if I don't know where we're going, I know I needed to look you in the eye and see if it still felt like something. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Does it? He asked. She exhaled. It does. But it's different now. Because I'm different. I know. I'm not asking for protection, she continued. Or answers.
I just want something real.
Something that doesn't feel like a test or a transaction. Nico leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. I don't want to be in control of your life, Emily. I want to be part of it, if you'll let me. On your terms. She studied him for a moment. The Nico who had once frightened her with his silence now looked disarmed. Not weak, never weak, but honest.
Open.
My terms, she repeated. He nodded. Then we start slow, she said.
No shadow.
No decisions made on my behalf. No people following me unless I say I need it. Agreed. I'm building something.
Monroe Creative is real now.
I have clients, deadlines, responsibilities. I'm not going to disappear into someone else's world just because it's easier. I wouldn't want you to, Nico said. That's what made me notice you in the first place. You were already fighting for your own life. I just didn't know how to respect that fight. She smiled for the first time that day. They left the cafe without holding hands, without labels. But something between them had shifted. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was quiet, mutual understanding. And for Emily, that was more powerful than any declaration. Over the next several weeks, their lives began to intersect more naturally. They met once or twice a week, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to walk the streets of the city together. They talked more than they touched. They disagreed sometimes. Nico was still guarded, and Emily still bristled when she felt his instinct to protect slipping into decisions he made without her. But they spoke about it. Openly. Deliberately. There were no tests now. Only choices. Riley, upon hearing that Emily had resumed seeing Nico, had opinions. He's still Nico Moretti, she warned. You don't just stop being that. I know who he is, Emily replied. Do you trust him? I trust myself, Emily said. That's new. It wasn't about blind faith. It was about the boundaries she had reclaimed and the clarity she had earned. She wasn't looking to be rescued. She was building a life, and if someone wanted to walk beside her, they had to understand that it was her path, not theirs to pave. Then, one afternoon, news reached her that Jake had been arrested in Connecticut. Possession of illegal surveillance equipment.
Obstruction of justice.
Interference with an ongoing investigation. The details were scarce, and Emily didn't ask for more. She didn't need to. She knew Nico had something to do with it. She also knew he would never say so. When she mentioned it in passing over dinner, Nico simply said, "Some people walk too close to the edge. Eventually they fall." "I don't need him gone to feel safe," she replied. "No," Nico agreed. "But it helps." That night, she stood on the balcony of his apartment, overlooking the lights of Manhattan.
The city pulsed beneath them, alive, chaotic, endless.
Nico joined her, standing quietly. "I used to think love meant becoming small enough to fit into someone else's world," Emily said. "And now? Now I think love should make room. Not cages." He reached out, not to pull her in, but to let his hand rest near hers. "You've never been small," he said. She turned to him, the wind tugging at her hair.
"I'm not scared of the fire anymore," she whispered.
"You never should have been." She looked at him, really looked. At the man who had once watched her from the shadows, who had misstepped and misjudged but never turned away. At the man who had tried to protect her the only way he knew how, and had learned slowly to let go. "I love you," she said. Not because she needed to. Because she wanted to.